Welcome to Focus Today. Steve Johnson here with you, and we have a fascinating guest. If you're especially interested in anything that might be semi-historical, what is going to happen in the future as well. So we're kind of hitting every single area there. Our guest is Jodell Onstott. She's a socio-biblical and historical researcher. She's written 5 books. The latest, and I know there's going to be a sequel because it says Volume 1. That means there's got to be a Volume 2, so at least 2 more. It's called YHWH Exists. It's a huge book. Jodell, good to have you with us. Man, did you think that this, I mean, how many pages do we have here? I didn't really count them. It's like over 1,000 pages. And you've got all sorts of maps and charts and things in there. Let me ask you, first of all, what's the purpose of this book, YHWH Exists?
You know, I started out really as my own personal journey to know what the evidence for God was. I had come up with a lot of obstacles in my own walk with God. So that's where it began. But very, very quickly, it turned into something a whole lot more. And that's why you have about 300 pages of nothing but endnotes, basically sourcing everything that I have researched and supporting every conclusion that I have come to along the way.
I get the idea that something like this wasn't designed to be this big originally, and then it just kind of balloons out. So this is Volume 1. Is Volume 2 in the works, and is it going to be as big as this?
It is. Volume 2 is slightly smaller, but it does cover, it covers more the Intertestament era and the New Testament era. So it deals with different information than what Volume 1 does. Volume 1 really deals with ancient Israel's history. What you hear among a lot of atheists, a lot of agnostics, is that there is no evidence for the history that we have in Scripture. They're just myth, folk tales, stories, and there's no archaeological evidence. So what my investigation does is it really researches that and puts it to the test to see if the evidence does indeed exist.
Okay, I want to have you address some of those common issues that are brought up that they say there's no evidence for. I want to ask you a question that's out of the box. I know that you weren't briefed for this. There is no wrong or right answer. But for somebody like you who's done this kind of research and you've looked at the history of what's happened in the Middle East, it begs the question, I've been wanting to ask a researcher like yourself this way. We see a lot of politicians trying to come up with a solution, 15-page document, how we can achieve peace in the Middle East. And I want your historical background, but also your opinion to be put into place. Do you see any kind of a political solution to what we are facing in the Middle East these days, which is pretty complicated?
You know, if we can agree that there is a God, and that he does exist, then the answer today has to be the same as it was when Israel first entered the land during the Judges era. And that is simply a return to the covenant. I do present evidence supporting ancient Israel's covenant as a constitution, very similar to the American Constitution. And when you return to that life-giving source, something that establishes peace and harmony within your own republic, it's going to spill over into your relationship with your neighbors. I believe Nathan Sharansky makes a very strong case for a policy of reciprocity where we make contracts, we make treaties with foreign, whether they be allies or whomever we do, those treaties and those contracts have to be held accountable. If they violate it, there has to be consequences. And, you know, there really has to be this policy of logical foreign policy where there is cause and effect. And whether you look at Americans' domestic policy or you look at our international policy, there's really this move to get away from consequences and this move to get away from logical kind of natural law, cause and effect, where you always have a third party that's trying to step in, whether it's the UN, the United States, and kind of mitigate those reactions rather than going in with a solid foreign policy from the beginning.
And this is something that, I mean, from your historical background, you're seeing a whole lot of trends and cycles that go on that way. And so I'm just wondering, what does that mean then for the U.S.? Do you see us playing a role if somebody wants to have peace in the Middle East? I don't really want to, I'm not trying to get way off topic on your book. I want to get back to that. But I'd like to have your perspective on that. What role does that third party, if it's a UN or U.S., play in your scenario?
I think that the U.S. can have a very strong policy. You know, Israel is a nation that does not have the capability of producing a lot of the armaments that are needed. So it has to contract those sources from a third party, such as the United States. I believe that Israel is now getting some of its ballistics and armaments from Russia as well. So that is a very real part of Israel's history right now, a very real part of the situation that they are facing politically and militarily. So I think that you have to hold nations accountable. So anyone that would come against Israel, you know, if Israel had done something that was egregious, something that was, you know, stay outside of that territory of land that they claim, whether it be as a state or even, say, from a biblical source. If they go outside of that, then there is reason for repercussions. But as long as they are staying within that boundary, then you have to hold the other nations accountable. From what I have seen and from what my research as far as the Palestinians, the West Bank, you see a lot of people that are able to just get a free pass anytime there's aggression against Israel. And it's really just something where there's blinders on. And now you have a lot of those nations that really don't value human rights, that don't value a lot of the Western values that we have as people that have grown up with a system of law and order and respect for human life. All of those nations are now on the UN advisory boards, and subsequently, a lot of those values and standards have really fallen as to what is acceptable.
Jodell Onstott, she's written several books, including the latest that we're going to be getting into a little bit more with, called YHWH Exists. It's a huge book. I mean, it's 1,000 pages long. This is for somebody who wants to get a historical view of the Exodus and so many other issues. This looks like a great place to start. And then Volume 2. When's Volume 2 coming out?
Probably next December.
Okay.
I haven't set an exact date. We're still working.
You know, let me, continuing our theme of what we see in the popular culture, I've noticed a lot of mostly it's reaction to news articles where you'll get everybody and their brother commenting about something that might be happening in Israel. And I've found there seems to be a common thread where there's an assumption that, well, Israel is just squatting on this land. It never was really theirs. It was always the Palestinians before theirs. And I thought, you know, I think we've got a huge void of historical background. Do you come across this where some people think that Israel was only given the land in the late 40s and they don't have claim to it anywhere past earlier in the history of mankind?
You know, that is I would call it a diatribe that you really hear from certain political sources. And when you follow the money, you find that most of those sources really have some sort of ties to Palestinians, Iranians, or something like that. Historically, what we find is that Israel's history stretches back 3,000-4,000 years. When you go and you sift through the Temple Mount sifting project and what happened when the Palestinians were given Jerusalem, they went in there and they just wholesale dumped archaeological evidence trying to get rid of it. So when you sift through some of those findings and you sift through some of those remains, you are finding remains from the Second Temple era. And guess what? These artifacts, whether they are bulle or seals or whether they are coins, they all have Jewish writing and Jewish names on them. So that shows a very long history tied to the land. And even when you go into the early, say the late 1800s, you find reports from scholars, from authors, where they travel the land and they say that it's very sparsely populated as far as Palestinians and really as far as any population really at all. So the claims that you hear, whether it be from Palestinians or Iranians, are really made up and they are not supported by the archaeological or the historical evidence.
I've seen that every once in a while they'll have these archaeological trips you can go on where you can actually be part of a dig. And I've thought, wow, that would be a cool thing. I mean, where else can you go and be a part of possibly uncovering anything from thousands of years ago? Have you had a chance to do anything like that in the Middle East or Israel? Because it sounds like you would love something like that, I would think.
Actually, yes, I do. I am going to Israel in 2 weeks. So that will actually be my first time.
Wow.
And I am digging, I'm not really digging, but we are sifting through the remains of the Temple Mount.
Oh, cool. Oh, neat.
Fun. But then I also am associated very loosely with the Mount Zion dig. I have not actually gone, but I hope to maybe go this summer and work with Dr. James Tabor and Gershon Galil and some of those archaeologists working on that older part. Right now they're down to the Second Temple remains, and we're waiting to see what lies beneath that.
All right. Okay. We are going to get into the book, Yahweh Exists, in our next segment. Stay tuned. We're talking with Jodell Onstott. She's the author of it, as well as several other books. The whole aspect of Israel and what we need to know about it. That's what I'm going to ask her about, is what do we find in this book that we really need to know that perhaps we have wrong ideas about. It's all coming up on Focus Today. Keep it here.
Hi, I'm Paulina, and I work at theDove TV. Did you know that when you support theDove TV, you have a profound impact, not only in our community, but around the world? It's your continued support that takes the inspiration and hope in the programs we produce and makes them available to the thousands of people who are watching these videos online every week. Help bring encouragement and hope to our valley and beyond by making a secure online donation today at our website, thedove.us.
Welcome back to Focus Today. Our guest is Jodell Onstott. She is the author of the book that I have right here called Yahweh Exists. Volume 1, it's huge. And then Volume 2 will be coming out, much lighter. You can talk like this when you pick it up. This one's heavy. And other books as well. I am going to get into this right now. Okay, Jodell, the antediluvian clue. Yeah, we're just going to get right into it. This is just one clue of what I've been looking at through this. This is an amazing bit of history that could be just all-consuming. People should take vacations to read this, I think. I mean, because there's a lot here, a lot of research you have done. And this begs the question, you're looking at evidence in a way that proves biblical points. Am I accurate in saying that? Because it looks to me like you've been able to chart a lot of things that people have found, a lot of dig things, where some who will say, you know, the Bible isn't a historical document. Well, we know it's a spiritual document, and yet there's so much history in it. Put this in perspective. From your research, where do you put all the data that you've had, that you've been able to find that's in the Bible with some of the evidence that you've been able to uncover?
You know, I really think that a lot of us who approach Scripture as primarily spiritual really miss on a lot of the political aspects that are established in ancient Israel's history. And I really find it to be primarily a political document that, like the United States Constitution, establishes this liberty for the nation. So what I found throughout my research is that, you know, you hear today a lot of voices, whether they be atheist, agnostic, that claim that there's no evidence for the Exodus. And this argument that they have sung over and over again has really caused Christianity, it's called Judaism, it's caused the entire Hebrew Bible to really be maligned and to fall out of favor within most of your political as well as scholastic organizations, academic organizations. So the question of credibility, the question of validity is really something that is central to any discussion that you're going to have with anyone where Scripture or the Bible is concerned. So what I did, and one of the things that I'd like to focus in on today is the Exodus. One of the reasons that atheists have so much, I would say, fire in their voice and so much credence in what they say and the charges that they bring against the text is that scholars have assigned a very arbitrary date to the Exodus where there is no evidence for it. And so when you go and you look for it and you find no evidence, most people will then automatically assume, well, the Bible is in error, these events never happened. But when you go back in time, when you go back to the chronology and the evidence that Scripture gives you and you put it together with the archaeological evidence, you find that there is incredible evidence for the Exodus, for the Canaan conquest. And then for me, I wasn't satisfied with just archaeology. I had to get into the constitution that God gave to ancient Israel, and I had to ask whether that was valid. So I had to get into a lot of medical research and just really the whole gamut of, is this a valid text? And is this something that nations would do well to order their societies according to these ideals? And the information that I came away with was just astounding. There's a lot of debate when you use the word prove, and I actually do use, proof of biblical events or proof of biblical history. It was really a hot topic because philosophically and academically, they say, no topic can be proved one way or the other. So what I tell people is that I have presented so much evidence that the evidence is so compelling, but then you have to decide for yourself whether that information is so substantive that it is compelling and it proves it for you and according to your beliefs.
Okay, so you're coming up against those who might be agnostics, atheists, and so on. Do you find even in the Christian community there's some opposition to you using the Bible as a basis for evidence? Because some people will say you can't look at it that way, and what's been your experience?
I really haven't found that opposition within Christianity or even Judaism that much. You do hear the arguments, well, you're questioning the traditional dates. We can't play with these simply because they're accepted. And my question is, if they're accepted and there's no evidence for them, then we have to go back to the drawing board and we have to really do some more research and some more digging to see where that evidence aligns. And so I've presented 2 chapters of evidence showing exactly where that evidence aligns and showing evidence of mass migration, showing evidence of death of the firstborn, a very large disproportionate amount of infant burials, showing evidence of a type of slave labor. And that's something that a lot of people is kind of a misnomer, is this idea of slavery in Egypt, which have been a corvée labor that it wouldn't have just affected Hebrews in Israel. It really would have affected a lot of the poor Egyptian population as well. Wow. So when you go back to these ideas and you re-examine the text and you kind of take out a lot of the man-made traditions that we've attached to it over the last 3,000 years, what you get is really like this pure gold nugget that is cram-packed with incredible information. And, one of the arguments that I did hear, and this was actually from a friend a few years ago, was that if Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob never existed, Scripture would still be true. And that is something, it's a pill I just simply cannot swallow, because if Israel's history, as recorded in Scripture, did not happen, we're just playing games, and this whole religion thing becomes a farce. So you have to have accountability, you have to have credibility, and that's really what, at least according to the text, separates Israel and Israel's God from that of other religions, is this validity, is this history, and the validity of the text. Yeah.
Jodell Onstott, our guest, author of, we're talking about YHWH Exists. She's also written other books as well. This is Volume 1, Volume 2, probably coming out a year from this December. Okay, so totally unfair to you, but I'm going to ask you anyway, because we've only got a few minutes. And this is, I don't mean to insult all your research that's here, but what can you tell us about the Exodus? Have you come up with any kind of a time frame, since some people say we can't figure that out?
Absolutely. The date of the Exodus, that, believe it or not, I am not alone in this supposition, because all ancient authors at one point in time held to this date, and that is the Exodus at 1548 BCE and the Canaan conquest at 1508, which is supported by archaeological evidence as well. Vast. Out of 236 known archaeological sites in Canaan, 223 of them show massive destruction right around 1500 BCE. So the archaeological evidence is in direct support of that date, as well as was Josephus, Demetrius, and the New Testament. It's funny because the New Testament, in one text, it supports the ancient date. In another text, it supports a later date. And that seems to be what was popular among writers of that day. Some of them would support the earlier date, and some of them would support the later date. But it's not this dividing line. It's not something that should divide anyone, but rather the evidence for what really happened and for that truth should be something that unites us and something that brings, greater credibility and really gives us a stronger faith.
So it sounds like what you're saying is that the dating that we may find in the Bible, it might be different, two of them. It's just the author of that book taking a certain viewpoint, saying, well, here's the evidence that I had that it started at this point. Is that right?
For the New Testament, yes.
Yes, yeah,
right.
right.
For the Old Testament, remember, New Testament authors are 600 years removed from the event, or at least from Israel's history. A lot of Israel's archives were destroyed in the fire that, reaped through Jerusalem. But before that, when you get into just the Old Testament, you find everyone there had access to those archives. They had access to that history. So within the Old Testament, you find that there is only one date that is really supported and one date that you can reconstruct very, very easily. I won't say very easily, but you can construct very logically from the information that is in the text. And I am going to be uploading, hopefully before I leave for Israel in 2 weeks, I will be uploading a chronology of the Judges era that will be on the academia.edu website.
Okay, give me that again, that website.
Sure, it's just www.academia.edu, and then you would just look for my name, Jodell Onstott.
Okay, all right, that sounds great. Wow. Well, I think it'll be fun to talk to you after you get back from your trip to Israel. How long are you going to be there?
I am there for 2 weeks. Okay. We are going from Hatzor in the north through Beth Shan and into Jerusalem.
That's great. And this is your first time there?
This is my first time. I've done all this research. I've read excavation reports. I've seen videos, but nothing beats walking on the land.
Yeah, this is going to be like your own pilgrimage. Are you going to be able to see some of the archaeological evidence that you have in your book here?
That's exactly what I'm doing. When I talk about Hatzor in chapter 11 of my book quite extensively, and I talk about the destruction layers. One of the arguments is that Hatzor was destroyed very later, and when you go to the archaeological evidence, you find that there's 2 times it was destroyed, and Scripture records one time in Joshua's era, one time in Deborah's era, and the archaeological record is in perfect harmony. So I'm going to be looking at Hatzor. I'm going to be looking through those destruction layers that I've read about. And hopefully there'll be some archaeologists there on staff that can give us a better view of what we're seeing. I
have the feeling after 2 weeks, you're going to wish you could be there another 2 weeks. I mean, there'd be all sorts of things that you'll end up wanting to see, I imagine. So that's probably the first of many trips back there, I would imagine, for you.
Absolutely. I hope to go again this summer and dig on Mount Zion.
Oh, there you go. Good. All right, Jodell Onstott, author of 5 books, including this one called YHWH Exists, the latest. This is Volume 1. Volume 2 could be coming out in a little bit over a year from now. And amazing research. I'm going to find it interesting to look through this. This is not light reading, that's for sure. But somebody who really wants to know the history and how that ties in with what's happening, what has happened in Israel, and maybe what's happening now should do it. Thank you for being a part of Focus Today, Jodell.
Thank you so much for having me, Steve.
All right, we're going to be back with more in just a couple minutes. Stay tuned here for Focus Today.